helicopter has been deployed, while 2 crew members have been rescued so far. Now we start with Syria, and US-Syrian President Ahmad al-Sharaa has made a historic visit to Washington. Al-Sharaa has met with President Donald Trump at the White House. The meeting marks the first time a Syrian leader has visited the US in years after Sharaa's rise from former al-Qaeda commander to president. Trump has praised Sharaa as a tough leader and vowed to do everything he can to help make Syria successful. Sharaa has said that his association with al-Qaeda is a matter of the past and was not discussed during his meeting with President Trump. Meanwhile, a U.S. official has announced that Syria is now part of the global alliance against Islamic State and that it is allowed to resume diplomatic operations in Washington. Trump has also expressed his hope to meet and speak with Sharaa again in the future. The meeting comes after a major shift in U.S. policy, with the Treasury Department extending the suspension of sanctions enforcement under the 2019 Caesars Act for another 180 days. However, only Congress can fully lift the sanctions. Now for this discussion, we welcome Dr. Punsara Amarasinghe. He's from Kotawala Defense University, joins us live from Colombo. Thank you very much, Professor and Doctor, for joining us again. Good to see you. Now, looking at this, how could President Ahmad al-Sharaa's visit to Washington, how is this reshaping Syria's geopolitical alignment with its relations with U.S. and West compared to traditional allies such as Russia and Iran?
By all means, President Shahraa's visit becomes extremely historical because his visit happened to be the very first visit made by any Syrian president since the country became independent in 1946. But ironically, this man, President Sharaa, right, he had a militant background. He was an al-Qaeda promoter and he was fighting for global jihad. Ironically, his head was having a 10 million bounty from the US State Department. But in politics, as you know, there are no eternal friends or enemies, and this man has finally shifted to the American side. And if you look at the longer implications from this sudden shift of the policies from Washington towards Damascus, what becomes obvious is that Americans simply want to leverage their position in the Middle East to undermine the Russian expansionism. Because as you know, when President Bashar was in power, the Russians were having heavy influence over Syria. There were even Russian naval bases in Latakia and some other places. But after the fall of President Bashar, now President Sharaa is going to be a hardcore American supporter. And he was hosted by President Trump in White House, and the sanctions are being lifted up, and all these things are quite clearly indicating that Americans are trying to leverage this newly revived relations with Syria for greater strategic goals. The number one is to somehow dismantle the IS influence and the remaining global jihadist position in the Middle East. As you can see, for the past few weeks, Syrian forces have been launching a lot of military strikes, and they have been striking IS targets across Syria. So this is something that Washington expects from President Sharaa to continue. And secondly, in the longer run, we can clearly see that this influence, if it goes to the pot, it might end up paving the path to revive, to restore the relations with Israel. Maybe, I hope that might be somewhere in the long run. The Americans are trying to bring Syria to Abraham Accords to normalize relations with the state of Israel.
And now bringing Caesar's the Act sanctions to a perspective or our conversation, can you tell us more about the Caesar's Act sanctions and how might this affect power dynamics in the Middle East?
Yeah, so this will simply impact the power dynamics on the Middle East from multiple fronts, because mainly the Americans, but we need to acknowledge that even though the president has made this executive order to lift up all these bans, it is still yet to be confirmed. And by this, the new the new coalition, the increase of the US aid to Syria, the Syrians will slightly gain upper hand over the Middle Eastern influence and Middle Eastern politics. And at the same time, I need to acknowledge that this will dramatically reduce Iranian and the Russian influence over the Middle East. But before I conclude, I must mention that if you look at the history of the American influence in the Middle East, I hope that Washington has learned from its dubious past, especially in the 90s and the late 80s. The Americans were supporting leaders such as Saddam Hussein, right? And during Iran-Iraq war, Saddam Hussein was supported by Washington. And so many, the sanctions were lifted up by the US State Department. But the history has clearly shown what actually happened at the end of the day. Saddam Hussein became a fatal enemy to the United States. And the Americans were doing the same thing to Mujahideen and the Taliban in Afghanistan. And they were all historic blunders, right? So we actually cannot make any single guarantee that President Sharaa will always remain faithful to the Western, the allies and the intentions of the West.
Yes, and building on that, how could Syria's inclusion in the US-led coalition against Islamic State influence perception of legitimacy for this particularly Ahmad al-Sharaa's government, both domestically and across the globe?
Yeah, so if you look at the past few weeks, I would say that, especially, I would say that since last October, since President Sharaa met with the Russian counterpart, Vladimir Putin, in Moscow, right? So it was kind of a balancing act, but gradually it became very much clear that when Americans approached him, the President Sharaa's position and the entire Syrian position became very much favorable towards the Americans and the West. So the West at the moment expects one major goal to accomplish in the Middle East, that is to dismantle the global jihadism and the IS network. So as far as we understand, that Syria was kind of a cradle for the IS activism and the IS expansionism for past 1.5 decades, since 2011. So IS had very strong, the bastions across Syria. So the military support is vitally important to eliminate the prevalent threats of IS and rest of the Islamic militant groups in Syria and also across the Middle East as well. So in that context, the Syrian participation in this coalition, the allied forces, Syria's active participation in the military operations will be a paramount factor for the West to accomplish all the military targets, especially in the Middle East.
Right. With that, I would like to thank Dr. and Professor Pansara Amarasinghe for joining us and sharing that insight. Thank you very much. Now we stay in the region. The U.S. Senate has passed a bill to end the longest government shutdown in American history, which is now headed to the House for final approval. The 41-day deadlock was broken after a 60-40 vote, with most Republicans and 8 Democrats backing the measure. The deal reopens the government but leaves the issue of health care subsidies, which is a key Democratic demand, for a debate in December. The House is expected to return from recess and vote on the bill within days, formally bringing the historic shutdown to an end. Let's in fact listen into what of the Republican senator has said.
And I just want to reiterate my gratitude for my colleagues, our staff who have worked night and day, literally, and all of those who have brought us to this point. We are going to reopen government. We're going to ensure that federal employees, whether they were furloughed or laid off or forced to work without pay, will now receive compensation that they've earned and deserve. And we will also be able to celebrate on Veterans Day tomorrow the fact that we have passed the appropriations bill for the VA. And this would not have come about without the work of so many people too numerous to mention. But I do want to thank my fellow appropriators, particularly the chairs of the three committees, Senator Bozeman, Senator Hoeven, and Senator Mullen, for their hard work.
Meanwhile, U.S. President Donald Trump has praised what he called a very good bipartisan compromise, saying the agreement marks a new start. He also added that his administration wants a healthcare system that pays money to people, not to healthcare companies. Let's listen into what he has said.
Well, I will be. I'll abide by the deal. The deal is very good. We're not going to be giving $1.5 trillion to people that came in from jails and from, the gangs and drug dealers and all of these others that they wanted to be given health care, which would have hurt our health care system.
Now for this discussion, we welcome Collins Chong-Yu Keat. He's a Foreign Affairs Security and Strategy Analyst, joins us live from University of Malaya, Kuala Lumpur. Thank you very much, Professor, for joining us again. Good to see you. Professor, now looking at this, how significant is the end of the 41-day longest U.S. government shutdown, and what damage would take long to undo for them? What political consequences could the shutdown have for both parties?
I think it reflects the the confidence being put in place on the courage by the Republicans, by President Trump, that the serious matters that would need to be taken care of, and of course also this is for the long-term future of the country and for the American people, and this short-term sufferings, or whatever you want to call it, it is not by design by President Trump, and that it is needed to ensure that the people, the Congress, will do its job to focus on things that matter, eventually to prioritize the American people, and that but this Senate vote now ends the uncertainty, and that was beginning to spill into different areas, and of course investors hate this kind of unpredictability, but this move now, it will stabilize confidence, and not just in the U.S. economy, but you also have these ripple effects across the world. But this President Trump's response has been encouraging, has been good. By calling the deal as very good, he's framing this end of this shutdown as a strategic victory to exert pressure, to force real negotiations, and to have the capacity to now deliver the stability needed. So this will position himself as both strong and responsible, and also consolidating capital in terms of the courage to fix broken processes and to compel Washington to take his priorities very seriously. So I think it's a very strategic win, not for President Trump himself per se, but in larger parts for the American people, to ensure that priorities are aligned now closer to home, and the end objective has always been to ensure that the American people are prioritized first, and the whatever spending and investments are for the good of the American people at large, and not for the as President Trump has stated, for the benefits of outsiders. So I think it is a very good move by President Trump himself.
And Professor, although President Trump's statement on healthcare reflects broader ideological divides within, how do you think these both parties will be doing moving forward to avoid this kind of government shutdown again?
I think the American people understand the core crux of the matter, and that for years and decades now, the Democrats have been avoiding these core issues that affect the American people, from healthcare to spending on healthcare services to aliens to foreigners. That has been the main essence of what President Trump himself has repeatedly argued, that the priorities have been misaligned, have been mismatched at the expense of the American people, and that far too many, too much inefficiencies, a bloated spending capacity that did not bring, real tangible, benefits to the American people. So Trump's message goes straight to the heart of the concerns of the American people in terms of healthcare, in terms of reducing the, healthcare prices of medicines and groceries. So too much money has been spent on corporations that do not directly benefit the American people. That's what Trump has been doing now, to tap into this public frustration, rightly so, in terms of this expensive, bloated, and corporate-driven healthcare system. So, as we can see during his first term also, he has reduced drug prices, and now in the second term he will continue to do so. and that attacking one of the most unpopular animals of the U.S. healthcare system, the dominance of the insurance companies, pharmaceutical giants, hospital systems that inflate costs at the expense of the working class of the American people. So I think Trump is right to bring this issue forward and to ensure that not only for this issue but for the core issue that affect the American people at large, which will be of course with regards to immigration, with regards to the inflow of fentanyl, of these things that have driven this new crisis of health of the American people, and also the safety of the American people. So I think the American people at large understand why President Trump has to do this and why Republicans have to do this. And this is a message to Democrats also that it is high time for priorities to be emphasized and to be prioritized for the benefits of the American people at large and for the American middle class also.
Yes, indeed. With that, I would like to thank Professor Collins Chong Kyu Yu